Victory 7. A funeral for an assassination victim in Beirut while new artillery duels break out in northern Lebanon. Kremlin leaders say they'll hold a news conference to talk about missiles. Good morning, this is Doug Poling with the CBS World News Roundup. Columbia approached the start of its 5th day in orbit, but now there's a problem.
This is Jackie Judd at the Johnson Space Center. The breakdown of the main computer in Space Lab is such a critical loss that NASA is jiggering the schedule for carrying out scientific experiments, delaying those tests most dependent on the high-speed data recorder. Mission specialist Robert Parker is trying to find out what's wrong.
First of all, no particularly strange odors that you might not expect to find in a tape recorder anyway. No obvious debris, and the tape looks to be in perfectly good shape, and the tension is on both tension arms.
NASA suspects the computer broke down because it was being fed too much electrical current. The computer stores and relays information about the Space Lab experiments. The backup system operates 32 times slower than the high-speed recorder, so NASA's hope is to get things working again, and soon. Before this problem cropped up, there were congratulations all around for the work of the men and the machines during the past 24 hours. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
First, a little light news. A food galley was put on Columbia for this 9-day mission. The commander, John Young, saying he knows how the early aviators must have felt as he tried to make lunch on the new space-age kitchen.
Probably the same way when Orville and Wilbur did it, too, back here in the Wright Flyer, I think. The trouble getting the guys out of the Space Lab to come and eat.
Well, I bet they're ready for that, John.
They have so much fun traveling up and down the tunnel. They come to the door, stick their head in, and say, "What's for John?" Before you can tell, they go back and start more science.
It's not just experimenting that's keeping the Space Lab crew so busy this morning. The broken high-speed data recorder has forced the crew to start sending down their science information on a recorder in the orbiter that's 32 times slower. That serious failure on board the billion-dollar orbiting laboratory could mean an end to the talk of extending this mission. It has already forced some changes in the schedule for some of the experiments. Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News, live at the Johnson Space Center.
CBS News, I'm Marlene Sanders. Civilian threatened by a malfunctioning data recorder, and the transmission of research material from the space shuttle to Earth has slowed down. Despite the problems, nearly all of the planned 72 scientific experiments have been activated.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend. CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney.
Was the reason NASA first considered lengthening Space Lab's stay in orbit, but now the dry lake bed in California is drying out so quickly Columbia could probably come home on schedule. Nonetheless, Flight Director John Cox guesses that if the weather works out and if there are enough important experiments left over, Space Lab's crew probably will rack up a day's overtime in orbit.
I'd like to know soon, but I think it's all going to be a function of weather, and we'll probably delay that decision probably as long as we can.
Many of the experiments on Space Lab's cramped schedule have been curtailed. Cox estimates that an extra day would let the crew catch up on about half of its leftover work. But for a long time today, it looked as though even an extra day wouldn't have helped the crew catch up. A complex high-speed data recorder failed. That threatened to cost the shuttle a large amount of data from its experiments. And as a byproduct, it threatened to knock out all of the shuttle's TV coverage. Bob Parker seemed to try everything. He even sniffed at the busted machine.
No particularly strange odors that you might not expect to find in a tape recorder anyway. No obvious debris, and the tape looks to be in perfectly good shape.
The problem with the complex machine turned out to be a simple one. The blame eventually went to a piece of debris caught in a rubber pinch roller. A simple twist of a cheap screwdriver took care of the repair. It's a sort of simple fix that many videophiles might perform for themselves here on Earth. But then again, Earthlings don't have to put up with excess hydrogen in their drinking water. That's the sort of thing that can give an astronaut a space-age version of Montezuma's Revenge. The unappetizing alternative is now being practiced by the shuttle crew. They're dumping their drinking water into empty urine bags and spinning it round and round to get rid of the excess gas. So if the Space Lab crew gets an extra day in orbit, and if that extra day is anything like today, it'll be filled with a major glitch, a host of minor headaches, and 2 long 12-hour shifts of commands from Houston.
Try again. I'll be around all day. I got no place to go but round and round and round and round.
At the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Israeli jets again on the attack in Lebanon. Salvadoran defense chief denounces death squads. A rash of mystery fires continues at the University of Massachusetts. Good morning. This is Bill Lynch with the CBS World News Roundup. An American Space Lab shuttle mission, a flight that has become a do-it-yourself challenge for the orbiting handyman. Much of the scientific mission was jeopardized yesterday when a high-speed tape recorder jammed, but crew member Bob Parker was able to fix it after several hours of tinkering. There have also been problems with other experimental gear, but officials are still considering extending the mission to 10 days. We get more from Jackie Judd in Houston.
Space Lab carries 2 pilots, 4 scientists, and the experiments of more than 300 scientists on the ground who have long awaited a gravity-free laboratory. British physicist Michael Haynes is one of the 300.
For a long time I've been annoyed by the existence of gravity and an interference in the things that I wanted to investigate, because it does confuse a lot of things that I'm interested in.
For Dr. Haynes, Space Lab's 9 days in orbit are the culmination of 9 years of research.
I'd measure it not in hours, but in volume of paper. I suppose in my office, which is the size of this room, maybe 10 by 15, all 4 walls are filled with racks of paper, and 3/4 of it is Space Lab paper. The legend is that if we couldn't launch Space Lab, we could stack the paper on end and reach the right orbital height that way.
Many lifetimes of preparation and more than $1 billion worth of science equipment are aloft with Space Lab. As he watches from the ground, Dr. Haynes already is thinking about what life will be like when Space Lab touches down.
Back to normal. Back to doing the things I should have been doing for the last 9 years, teaching and researching.
Will there be a vacuum? Will there be some sense of...
No, not at all.
A lack of a big goal the way you've had
It's like
now?
the end of a marriage in a way. You'll lose a lot and gain a few things, I suppose, but yes, I'm sure I shall adapt.
Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Furnace being used to create new metal alloys and a mirror heating facility for crystal growth were both knocked out of commission by the same power surge. This time, a simple screwdriver won't fix the problem. Mission specialist Bob Parker, who complained early in the mission about his heavy workload, is now volunteering to play guinea pig because of the extra free time. But Parker says he's in no rush for an answer.
I'll be around all day. I got no place to go but round and round and round and round.
NASA should decide this weekend whether they will extend this maiden voyage of Space Lab by 1 day. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Neil Strasser. Shows it still thumbs up for the shuttle mission. Jackie Judd reports.
Equipment failures in Space Lab are not changing NASA's assessment that this maiden voyage is a success. Overnight, 2 furnaces used to combine and bake various materials broke down because of a short circuit in the power supply, and a camera focused on Earth jammed. So 4 experiments have been canceled and about half a dozen left incomplete. NASA's chief scientist on the ground is Dr. Rick Chappell.
One cannot be disappointed with this mission in the least bit at this stage. We have just a flood of truly exciting scientific results that are still coming every day. One is disappointed always to see an experiment have a problem, but in the context of the overall mission, we're seeing tremendous scientific return.
A decision on whether to extend the 9-day mission by 1 day probably will be made by tomorrow night. Considering the problems in carrying out some of the experiments, there is plenty of work left for the Space Lab scientists. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Computers have failed, an Earth mapping camera is jammed, so is the electron beam gun. And data from 3 other experiments was lost during the 11-hour shutdown of the only high-speed recorder on Space Lab. But mission scientist Rick Chappell says it would be wrong to assume this maiden voyage of Space Lab is the least bit disappointing. 90% of the experiments on board, he says, are working just fine.
My experience in flying things in space is that you do everything as carefully as you can, you test everything as much as you can, you build your confidence as strongly as you can, and then you cross your fingers and launch it.
Spacelab has already provided a flood of new scientific information, new metals, clues to space sickness, and the evolution of nearby planets and stars. Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News, the Johnson Space Center.
CBS News, I'm Bob Schieffer. For Columbia more time to complete its mission. Jackie Judd reports.
The orbiting spacecraft Columbia will stay in orbit an extra day until next Thursday morning, extending NASA's longest ever shuttle mission to 10 days in all. The voice of Mission Control is John Lawrence.
The decision was made when it became clear that reserves of critical orbiter supplies, including fuel cell reactants and propellants, will easily support an extension, and after a review of Spacelab science objectives showed that extending the mission from 9 days to 10 could add substantially to the mission's science return.
Weather is the variable in the plan. If forecasters see rain or clouds over the landing site at Edwards Air Force Base in California, then the schedule could be juggled again. But for now, the Spacelab scientists have another 24 hours to carry out their experiments. Some testing time was lost today because of more equipment failures, but NASA labels this maiden voyage as 90% successful so far. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
CBS News, I'm Carol Pazewski. A six-man crew will continue its Spacelab mission an extra day, weather permitting, and is now scheduled to land in California's Mojave Desert Thursday morning. Equipment problems have disrupted some experiments aboard the orbiting science station, and the extension will allow the crew some time to complete some back work. NASA says the decision was made when it became clear that the craft's fuel supplies were sufficient for another day. In fact, NASA says the mission could go 12 days if necessary. I'm Carol Pazewski, CBS News.
Columbia's mission has been extended from 9 to 10 days. The extra time will allow the astronauts to add even more to what's already being called a tremendous scientific return. The new shuttle landing time is Thursday morning in California at Edwards Air Force Base.
Mutual News via satellite. I'm Dave Chester. Officials Saturday announced they're extending the mission of the shuttle Columbia and Spacelab 1 for an additional day. Some more scientific experiments can be conducted. Sarah Keegan at the Johnson Space Center in Houston told Mutual News the extension was approved because the flight's a success.
This decision was made when it became clear that reserves of critical orbiter supplies, including fuel cell reactants and propellants, will easily support an extension, and after a review of Spacelab science objectives showed that extending the mission from 9 days to 10 could add substantially to the mission science return.
Sarah Keegan of NASA in Houston. The Columbia is now set for landing in the California desert on Thursday. You're listening to Mutual News.
CBS News, I'm Vicki Kelly. Garriott was hamming it up again this morning on board the Space Shuttle Columbia. He took time out to take a call from a fellow ham radio operator. This one, Jordan's King Hussein.
Hello, Whiskey 5, Foxtrot, this is Juliet Yankee Delta 1. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. This is W5 Lima Foxtrot Lima coming right back. Your signals are 5 by 9 for us. I just passed over the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. I'm looking down on your country right at this time, sir. This is Royal Highness speaking, over.
King Hussein is the first ham radio operator outside the U.S. to make contact with Garriott.
KPRC.
NBC News. This is John Bohannon. Still going well aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia. Correspondent Jay Barbrie is covering the story at Cape Canaveral. He's on the line with us now. Jay, what's the latest?
Spacelab is moving through orbit 100 of 162, now scheduled for the mission, John, with all going well. Earlier, the crew got a jammed camera working again, and now astronauts Owen Garriott and Byron Lichtenberg are trying to make themselves sick. They're placing their heads inside of a rotating drum and are being pulled toward the floor while mild electrical shocks are applied to their legs. The exercise is an attempt to learn more about space motion sickness. And by the way, John, each orbit, Spacelab is sending so much data to the ground, if you typed it out on an average typewriter, the information would reach from Earth to the moon.
Well, if we can send a man to the moon, why not little O's and ones and little letters? Thank you, correspondent Jay Barbry from Cape Canaveral. Columbia is due back on Thursday.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. Today, Astro repairman Robert Parker and Ulf Merbold have managed to fire up a balky furnace used for experiments, and they've also fixed the film jam-up in a camera that's supposed to map the Earth's surface. And Astro ham Owen Garriott found time to talk to Jordan's King Hussein by amateur radio. NASA's plan still calls for a one-day extension of the mission until Thursday morning.
Mission, and everything's going fine. Meanwhile, Wisconsin Senator William Proxmire of Golden Fleece fame isn't happy with NASA. Says the space agency wants to put a multi-billion-dollar civilian space station into orbit just to keep its employees busy.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. Space Shuttle, several important Space Lab experiments were saved thanks to the handiwork, including a broken furnace and a camera used for mapping purposes. At the mention of the mission, Flight Director John Cox said the long-range weather forecasts are favorable for a Thursday landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California. CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood. Men who have been doing a lot of repair work on this current mission will take time out from their busy schedules on Monday to talk with the leaders of the United States and West Germany. President Reagan and Chancellor Helmut Kohl will be talking with the crew for about 15 minutes over a complex communications hookup. The president in Washington, Kohl in Athens. West Germany is represented on the flight by payload specialist Ulf Merbold. Paul Lockwood, CBS News.
Kelly. They're in their second week in orbit today, and they plan to rehearse for a chat with President Reagan and West German officials. The chat will require a very complex network of satellites and landlines. One space agency official says the arrangements involve more players than World Hockey. I'm Vicki Kelly, CBS News.
CBS News, I'm Charles Osgood. Sirius Garriott in the orbiting space lab has been communicating with fellow ham radio enthusiasts on Earth this morning.
W5 Lima Foxtrot Lima in the spacecraft Columbia is calling CQ North America. Should be passing over Florida just about this time.
Coming up next, more formal radio contact with Earth as Jackie Judd reports.
A communication system almost as complex as Spacelab itself will be tested in about 40 minutes. President Reagan in Washington and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl in Athens, Greece, plan to call up to the Spacelab crew for a brief conversation. Then reporters in 6 European capitals will question the astronauts about the week-old mission. The plan involves the use of 5 satellites in space and thousands of miles of cables. The lines are being checked and rechecked.
Columbia, this is a test from USIE Studios in Washington. How do you read me? Read you loud and clear.
NASA is leaving nothing to chance after a news conference last week when someone pulled a plug, making it impossible for the crew to hear the reporters. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
Pulled the plug on the space press conference the other day. Everyone is making doubly sure the same thing doesn't happen when the President Ronald Reagan calls from the White House and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl makes a call from Athens, Greece. Communication checks have been going all morning long. It worked a little while ago when from Germany the Science Minister Heis Reisenhuber called Ulf Merbold on board Spacelab. The only problem there was that they were talking German. I don't understand that.
Wo soll auf unsere zukünftige Partnerschaft angelegt werden?
Minister, ich möchte noch schnell unseren Commander hier vorstellen im Fernsehen hier.
Ulf Merbold was introducing his American boss, John Young. The President and the Chancellor are expected to talk to the crew for about 15 minutes, beginning at 8:45 this morning. We'll cover the phone call live. After all, what's a few more miles of cable after a conversation has traveled more than 200,000 miles through 5 satellites? Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
In Houston. NBC News, good morning. I'm John Palmer. Astronauts had a direct conversation with the President and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl this morning. First, you'll hear the President and astronaut John Young.
It is fitting that on this, the German-American tricentennial, the German astronaut is part of the shuttle G. The shuttle is demonstrating that technology can be used to bring people together in a new spirit of enterprise and cooperation.
President and Mr. Chancellor, we're delighted that you could visit with us today in the Space Shuttle Columbia and visit with us in the Space Lab. We're standing, rather floating in the Space Lab right now, and I'd be very pleased to introduce my fine crew.
This is NBC News.
NBC News. I'm Alan Walden. Call today to space. Both spoke with the Shuttle Space Lab astronauts as the mission continued without any major problems. From Cape Canaveral, NBC News correspondent Jay Barbary tells us
Space Lab crossed New Zealand at 11 a.m. Eastern Time and streaked past a full week in orbit. Mission Control says all is going well on board the joint American-European scientific flight. Space Lab is headed for a Thursday touchdown at California's Edwards Air Force Base.
Mission Commander John Young, a veteran of 6 space flights, describes Columbia as a super vehicle from start to finish.
Washington Space Lab and the capitals of Europe were linked today. KTRH's Doug Miller reports live from the Johnson Space Center that Columbia's crew heard congratulations from diplomats and world leaders on 2 continents.
London, Paris, Rome, Athens, Brussels, Bonn, Washington, Houston, all of those cities today were linked in a teleconference with their international laboratory in orbit. President Reagan praising Space Lab as a gift and a sign of goodwill.
Building on that goodwill, this is the first time a citizen from another country has joined one of our space missions as a member of the crew. It is an exciting first.
But this afternoon, with the international broadcast behind them, the crew of Space Lab is back at work, and so are the mission managers here at the Johnson Space Center. They're trying to sort out exactly what they'll do with their extra day in orbit. They have some ideas. They've been trading them with the astronauts this afternoon. And NASA says the wet lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base should be dried out by tomorrow, in plenty of time for a day-late landing on Wednesday morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend.
From ABC News, I'm John Grimes.
Originally planned to land Columbia on Wednesday. Now the space agency may ultimately have no choice. All of this depends on 2 storm fronts. One of them is now expected to move through on Wednesday, the other on Friday. Now the forecasts have varied all night long. Either one of them could speed up or slow down, canceling the idea of landing a day late on Thursday. But at last report, Wednesday's forecast for the possible landing time, that's the originally scheduled landing time, looks good. So NASA could decide to play it safe and cancel that extra day in space. Right now, it's anybody's guess, especially the forecasters whose predictions will be the basis of NASA's decision. The ominous weather question clouds what has otherwise been a day to celebrate aboard Space Lab. Houston, Washington, and half a dozen capitals of Europe today were linked with Columbia for an unprecedented international teleconference in space. Congratulations went from German government leaders to Space Lab scientist Ulf Merbold, and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl offered thanks to President Reagan.
Chancellor Kohl, I just want to tell you that it's such an honor for us to be together in demonstrating to the world that when people are free and work together, there's nothing that can't be accomplished.
And reporters from 6 nations were linked by satellite for a press conference with the crew of Space Lab. But after the show was over, it was back to work, and one experiment pushed Merbold to employ some colorful language. And that was mild to the ultimate 4-letter expletive that Merbold uttered when he accidentally tripped a switch that shut off some experiments. Well, tonight, the crew and the scientists on the ground have been trading ideas on what they'll do with the extra day that they hope to stay in space. A high-level NASA meeting is scheduled for tomorrow, a meeting in which the space agency's top brass is expected to decide if the weather will hold and whether Space Lab will stay in orbit an extra day. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, this is Paul Lockwood.
Jack Dyer.
CBS News, I'm Vicki Kelly. Officials are still waiting to make a decision about when to bring the Space Shuttle Columbia home. Originally, the shuttle was to come back on Wednesday. Then NASA officials hoped the weather would cooperate to push the landing back to Thursday. And now, Flight Director John Cox says even Thursday is iffy.
If we go for the 10-day mission, if we make the decision to do that, we would like to have a good weather predicted. And again, you can't guarantee it when you get there, but we'd like to have forecast good conditions on a nominal day plus 1 day.
NASA officials say there is a chance that the mission could be extended to Friday.
30 miles in space, Mike, the Space Lab crew is drawing more blood. Mission specialist Bob Parker letting his blood boil from time to time.
We have to do a pinch and stow for experiment 101.
You guys didn't know any of this until just now.
Bob, these are shopping list items we're laying on you here in the middle of the LOS.
Are you laying on them in the middle of trying to get some angular VOR down with some EMIR stuff?
That's first priority.
Then why don't we talk to you when we come back AOS?
Top NASA management will meet about 9 o'clock this morning to make the final decision about landing day, whether to land on Wednesday before that front hits California or wait it out until Thursday. The decision must be made soon because it will take a few hours to pack up and shut down the Space Lab. So the extra day in space is still in doubt, but KTRH's Doug Miller says NASA is still busy at the drawing boards, finalizing a plan for a spare day's work in space.
The busy schedule that's tried the time and patience of Space Lab crew members will finally slack off. That is, if the crew can fly an extra day that's now on the books as a light work day. NASA asked for the crew's suggestions overnight. Byron Lichtenberg offered the most interesting comment.
Yeah, the one problem with that extension day is I think we ate all the sunflower seeds yesterday afternoon. So I don't know what we can do about that. Might be some broccoli seeds left over from some meals we didn't eat, which we could use.
There will be experiments, especially medical tests, but the crew asked for more time to just look out the windows, perhaps snapping mapping photos of the individual areas on the ground that the individual crew members call home. And NASA is apparently ready to humor the Space Lab crew. Roughly half of the time on that spare day would be devoted to photography and leisure. At the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Exactly 7 o'clock.
Beirut reports 2 Israeli planes shot down over Lebanon, a pilot captured. A bomb on a bus in Jerusalem has killed several people and wounded more. Good morning, this is Reed Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. In the Space Shuttle mission now, a Pacific storm moving toward the landing site, Edwards Air Force Base in California. Jackie Judd has the latest from Houston.
Columbia's astronauts find out later this morning whether they will circle the globe an additional 16 times and land at Edwards Air Force Base in California Thursday instead of tomorrow. NASA wants the extension. Sergeant Gregory Keats, an Edwards forecaster, says the weather probably will cooperate, with any rain ending well before the landing.
We expect the system to be probably through the area, and so it'll be sufficiently, the weather just be partly cloudy skies on Thursday to allow a landing on Thursday.
Should there be a 10th day in space, Flight Director John Cox says Space Lab scientists want to take some hometown snapshots.
The crew had asked for some time to take some pictures of Europe and some along the East Coast. I think Byron was looking for some shots of MIT, and Ulf was probably looking for some European shots, so I suspect we'll work out something in there.
Science also will benefit by the one-day extension. Space Lab won't be shut down until 10 hours before landing. Jackie Judd, CBS News, Johnson Space Center, Houston.
NBC News. This is Cameron Swayze reporting. Columbia got the go-ahead today for an extra day in space. Landing now set for Thursday at Edwards Air Force Base, California, if the rain doesn't turn the dry lake bed there soggy. A tornado bulldozed through parts of Selma, Alabama before dawn this morning. 1 person was killed, 2 dozen hurt.
End the maiden voyage of Space Lab for 1 day. Now, it turns out the weather on Thursday will be better than it would be tomorrow. Details now in this live report from KTRH's Wayne Delchifino at the Johnson Space Center.
The landing will now come at 9:58 Houston time on Thursday.
There's some good news here. We are officially go for the extension day. The weather at Edwards is looking good for both Thursday and Friday. But we we do expect the whole lake bed to be dry.
Terrific.
The extra day was not the big topic of conversation on the lab. The noises were noises that Mission Control blamed on thermal stresses to Columbia as its payload bay pointed to direct sunlight. European Ulf Mirbold described it this way.
We had a little earthquake down here. There was a big bang about 10 minutes ago.
The extra day in space will be taken up with some experimenting, but mostly picture-taking and some leisure time. And from the sound of it, mission specialist Bob Parker can use it.
You guys sure didn't get it up any too early.
No, that's correct.
Known that this was going to happen for 7 days now.
Well, I didn't.
We broke the videotape 7 days ago.
Don't worry, Bob. You'll be home soon. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Marlene Sanders.
Loud that it woke Commander John Young from his sleep. It's a mystery of sorts surrounding some strange noises aboard the shuttle.
Oh, Columbia, she really doesn't care much for the hot test, boy. She is shook and grown, and tremendous jolts come from every part of the vehicle, from the tunnel area, from the nose, from the sides.
Even more dramatic was Ulf Merbold's description.
We had a little earthquake down here. There was a big bang about 10 minutes ago.
But no one here at NASA is worried about this. They suspect that all that noise is caused by temperature changes, with the shuttle connected to the big space lab expanding and contracting in the heat and cold of space. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Paul Lockwood. Under recent shuttle would have been spent stowing gear and doing other chores in advance of a scheduled Wednesday landing. But with the mission extended now to Thursday, the crew was able to continue working on various scientific experiments. Even with the extra day, landing is still planned for Edwards Air Force Base in California. Now this.
Sun is just rising over Houston, but the Space Shuttle Columbia has been in the light of the sun for 2 continuous days. It will stay in the sunlight until the orbiter begins its plummet to Earth tomorrow morning. It's a day for some experimenting, a lot of sightseeing, and if you're Bob Parker, what else? Some complaining.
I was unable to do that AEPI thing for 2 reasons. First of all, I got up there and discovered that the camera was dead in the sun. The second thing is, it's impossible, and you guys ought to understand it by now, it's impossible to do a procedure on 2 minutes' notice that one's never done before.
Yeah, we understand both complaints and agree with them, Bob.
That, at least, was a change. They'll begin trying to clean up in just a few hours. Tonight, they'll begin the process of shutting down the billion-dollar lab for tomorrow's 9:58 a.m. Houston time landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California, a landing that KTRH, of course, will cover live. And as the Space Lab crew sorts away its equipment for tomorrow's return, scientists here on the ground are eagerly awaiting the homecoming. KTRH's Doug Miller has a report.
Space Lab, like the shuttle itself, will be reused, and so after some of its experiments are removed at Edwards Air Force Base, Space Lab Program Manager John Thomas explains that the 14-ton laboratory will stay inside the shuttle's cargo bay for the piggyback 747 ride to Cape Kennedy.
The experiments are taken out. We do inspection on it. We then have another experiment, another payload following right behind this one, designated Space Lab 3, that uses this module, which will fly in November of next year.
Only a couple of changes are under consideration to iron out the technical bugs discovered on this maiden flight. Nothing that would interfere with Space Lab's future, carrying scientific cargoes into space through at least the end of this decade. At the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
100 or more are feared dead in a plane collision in Spain. Secretary of State Schultz suggests a meeting with Gromyko sometime next month. Good morning. This is Reed Collins with the CBS World News Roundup. Brought some
You know where the furniture is located in your house or apartment, just as astronauts know where the cockpit is in the space shuttle. The longer you live there, the easier it's supposed to get. But the crew of Skylab years ago, after 84 days in space, was complaining that they lost a sense of where objects were located relative to their bodies unless they could actually see it all the time. On Spacelab, they're blindfolding each other this morning to see if they can repeat the effect. One of those experiments that may help us someday if we proceed with a permanent space station and long stays in space again for crew members. It's certainly keeping the crew occupied this morning.
Notice that it's about time for one. We thought you'd be taking some pictures with the 33 camera. Just a reminder, you can go ahead and use Alpha 33 Alpha to check your magazine frames remaining.
They will have to start packing up soon to end their journey, but KTRH's Doug Miller says tomorrow's 9:58 a.m. landing at Edwards Air Force Base in California won't be the last hurrah for the shuttle's new lab.
Tomorrow morning will not be the end of Spacelab's long journey. After ground technicians at Edwards Air Force Base removed some data and samples from some of the more critical experiments, the billion-dollar laboratory will stay in the shuttle's cargo bay for the long 747 flight back to Cape Kennedy. There, the last of the experiments will be pulled out, and the lab will be inspected. Right now, Program Manager John Thomas can't see much of a need for improving Spacelab before its next flight. His reaction to Spacelab's maiden voyage is...
Elated. Very good. Has performed like a champ. It has gone very, very well. I don't see anything that we need to change in the operation of the Space Lab.
But NASA and the European Space Agency might decide to move the troublesome relay computers that have been malfunctioning in warm temperatures throughout this mission. But they'll have plenty of time to modify their new lab. Space Lab's next flight is now scheduled for November of next year. At the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
Blindfolds were part of a test to see if Spacelab astronauts can repeat something they saw years ago on the long Skylab flights. Instead of getting more familiar with where things were in their ship, the astronauts started forgetting unless they could constantly see them. Ground controllers and the folks who worked on the metric camera in Alabama want to see it stowed away. It's been mapping parts of the world never mapped before.
We've got the opportunity to look at real-time TV at that point. The guys up at Huntsville are awfully anxious to watch you do the camera removal.
Columbia will be traveling on a path it's never mapped before when it starts its return home tomorrow. Instead of cutting across Hawaii eastward, its orbit will have it coming from the Indian Ocean, then the toboggan ride up the Baja northward. The landing site, of course, the same, Edwards Air Force Base, California. The landing time, 9:58 Houston time tomorrow morning. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
NBC News, good morning. I'm John Palmer. Storm coming in off the Pacific, but they believe it will not affect the landing of the Space Shuttle Columbia set for tomorrow at 7:58 local time. This is NBC News.
NBC News. This is Cameron Swayze reporting. For the shuttle astronauts, they are packing up, taking a few more photos of Mother Earth. Their landing is set for tomorrow at Edwards Air Force Base, and the weather forecast looks good. A new winter storm has howled out of the Rockies, though. Interstate 80 in southern Wyoming is buried under a foot of new snow.
Bring a couple of six-packs.
Okay, 2 6-packs coming up.
And Space Lab, if you can spend a little more money, we can take care of some champagne out there.
When they start talking about the celebration, you know the landing can't be far away, and it's not. 24 hours away, just about. 9:58 a.m. Thursday morning, a date with runway 17, the lake bed at Edwards Air Force Base, California. In a few hours, the serious cleanup begins. But right now, the crew's been sightseeing, and they notice something funny, a washer floating by the window.
So we trust that things are not coming unbolted back there after 10 days, wouldn't you assume?
Owen Garriott wasn't worrying about the spaceship falling apart, but about a half a loaf of bread in the galley of Columbia.
If you see any more of those washers or bolts or anything like that, why don't you give us a call?
I was just reading the little tag that's on this half a loaf, and it says, last sale date, November 25. As I recall, that was a week or so before we launched, and I'm just wondering if we shouldn't have eaten the first half of this loaf.
The day wouldn't be complete without the now famous grubbiness of Bob Parker, who was asked this morning to fix an experiment that may not have shut itself down.
I'll follow instructions, of course, but I think it's a bunch of crap about a bunch of nothing.
Good old Bob Parker. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Wayne Dolcefino, KTRH News.
NBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Alan Walden.
It's not nice to second-guess Mother Nature, but NASA now sounds more confident than ever about the weather for tomorrow's landing. The forecast, clear skies, light winds. This afternoon is the time for fond farewells.
It's gotten better and better every day, and we're certainly been pleased with how things have gone up here, and we've enjoyed working with you all a lot.
Well, you guys have done a tremendous job. I know you're working hard, and you're looking forward to getting a little rest, but you've really done a super mission.
As a matter of fact, we'd be even more looking forward to another 10 days in orbit, but I don't think we got any chance of staying up here.
Well, this afternoon, many of the scientists and technicians who've worked on Space Lab here in Houston are flying out to California to catch the landing at 9:58 Houston time tomorrow morning. And, of course, Wayne Dolcefino and I will have it live here on KTRH. And live at the Johnson Space Center, this is Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Dallas Townsend.
Buys have already begun.
And we'll see you guys when you land.
Okay, bring a couple of six-packs.
Okay, 2 6-packs coming up.
On the eve of their return to Earth, the Space Lab crew is running through checklists, preparing them for landing with sometimes annoying reminders from the ground.
It's been our intent to make sure that all the drawers and doors were closed and ready for entry. If there's anything beyond that or special, you could let me know, but we'd plan to make sure everything was ready.
Owen Garriott there with an often repeated complaint from this crew that the ground controllers are sending up too many unnecessary commands. It's the problem that prompted today's now traditional daily gripe from Bob Parker.
I'll follow instructions, of course, but I think it's a bunch of crap about a bunch of nothing.
Well, tomorrow they won't have Bob Parker to kick around anymore. Columbia's return to Earth is scheduled for 9:58 in the morning, Houston time, and Wayne Dolcefino and I will cover it live here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. 3 men northeast on power.
Cleaning up, powering down, and packing it all away are the orders of business at this hour on board the Space Shuttle Columbia. All day long and all night long, they've been hearing praise, thanks, and a sort of relieved gratitude from people here on the ground. They're relieved that this longest Space Shuttle mission ever is finally coming to a close.
We wish you Godspeed and look forward to seeing you back in Huntsville. You have really done a great job.
Well, the good news like that began early when the Space Lab control room started emptying late this morning. Many of the people who worked very long and very hard hours on this flight left Houston today so that they could fly out to California and catch the landing.
We'll see you guys when you land.
Okay, bring a couple of six-packs.
Okay, 2 6-packs coming up.
Well, experiments were still underway all the way into this evening. So was the house cleaning. And so were the proud boasts of Space Lab managers, like Mission Manager Harry Kraft, who tonight said that Space Lab has already delivered more than 2 trillion bits of data, more than 20 million frames of TV pictures, and thousands of photographs still on board the shuttle.
We already have science data on its way to Europe. So overall, we're very pleased, and we're ready to go out and watch it land now.
So all seems happy on the eve of the landing here on Space Lab land. But wait, what is a story about Space Lab without a daily gripe from Bob Parker? And Bob's greatest fit on the eve of the landing came early this morning. Parental discretion is, well, listen to yourself. Well, we won't have Bob Parker to kick around anymore. He's coming back to Earth tomorrow morning if all goes well. The forecast calls for high clouds and light winds out at Edwards Air Force Base with a touchdown now scheduled at 9:58 a.m. Houston time. Wayne Spinner and I will finally wrap up our round coverage during the Third of Houston show here on KTRH. Live at the Johnson Space Center, Doug Miller, KTRH News.